Hello everyone, we welcome you for this webinar today, and we have Mr. Thomas from Nozomi Networks who is going to present this webinar. Over to you, Thomas.
Hi everyone. As previously introduced, my name is Thomas Nuth from Nozomi Networks, and today we're going to go over a short webinar that covers the top ICS cyber threats, everything from malware to accidental intrusion for industrial critical infrastructures, and how to manage them. Before we go into the details, I think I'd like to start off this presentation with trying to set a brief agenda and also establish some historical context of who we are and what our technology is, as well as where is this data coming from that has identified the top threats in the ICS market. So we're going to start with an introduction to SANS, which is the organization that put forth the 2017 SANS survey, and then we'll go over those identified top threats in this recent report, and how it was extrapolated and who was polled to obtain that information. And then we'll go into a solution breakdown. We'll of course cover Nozomi's technologies and approach to mitigating and preventing these threats for becoming an issue, whether your infrastructure be the grid or even something like an industrial automation plant or unconventional power network. And then we'll go over some deployment models, which in my opinion, I think a lot of practitioners and experts in the field would agree is a very important part of the ability to meet and mitigate against ICS cyber threats. And then we'll give a brief closure. So with that, what is SANS anyway? I'm sure many on the call might already know, but for those who do not know or are not aware of the SANS organization, the SANS Institute was established in 1989 as a cooperative research and education organization. Its programs now reach over 165,000 security professionals or ICS stakeholders around the globe. At the heart of SANS, there are many security practitioners in very global organizations and verticals, ranging from oil and gas, industrial automation, transportation, and certainly power distribution and control, or smart grid, if you will. And SANS is the most trusted, by far the largest source of information regarding security training and security certification in the world. So they definitely have a great reputation behind them, and that speaks to the next topic is how do they obtain this information and what information was gathered in the 2017 SANS survey. The survey that we're going to extract the top threats from will be linked at the end of this presentation. You can also download it by going to nozomi.com. They surveyed hundreds of ICS practitioners and cybersecurity stakeholders. Various vertical industries were touched, including, as I mentioned this earlier, energy manufacturing, oil and gas, and power, of course. And the ambition, if you will, the goal of this presentation was sought to uncover spending trends, cyber threat concerns, and point readers into the best technical and best practice direction for achieving privacy, resiliency, and cybersecurity in their critical infrastructure. So we're going to only touch a very brief and a very small portion, or the tip of the iceberg, if you will, of some of that important information that came out of this survey. So let's get to the numbers. Perceived threat levels. Out of the hundreds of ICS practitioners and stakeholders that were polled in this survey, they definitely wanted to gather some information on their perceived threat levels, and they asked it in this following question. So this is straight from the actual polling. How serious does your organization consider the current threats to control systems, and how serious control systems and cyber threats can be? So after I actually get that word salad after my mouth, you can see that basically high or several critical reaches around 80% when combined, and it's growing from last year. While this is not anything that's earth-shattering or extremely unknown to many of the professionals probably on this call, it does highlight how large of a proportion of cybersecurity professionals, operations managers, directors, etc., how many of them realize that cybersecurity and the threat that it poses to their business, to their operation, is extremely high. They do realize it. So that's actually good news. The other caveat, and it's really what we're going to talk about in this webinar, is the threat vectors. So what do I mean by threat vector? It's not just simply a poll where we ask the participants who gave us this information, what are your top three perceived threats, and then we rate them together. No, we placed all of their top three ratings together into a vector graph like you see here. So they were asked to rate first, second, and third, and then we were able to not only identify the collective most or primary threat, but also the most singular identified threat, which you guys can clearly see is external threats, either in the form of hacktivism and funded by nation states. So this is in the form of malware. I'm sure many of you guys have seen throughout the news in the last 2 months, especially things like WannaCry or Petya, Indestroyer. These are all malware attacks that often are at least executed as malware attacks with hacktivists, I guess you'd say, motivations. We often think these attacks are state-funded, and it's definitely something that's affected a lot of industries, not just the industries that initially these malwares were written for to attack. Take Indestroyer, for example. This was not necessarily supposed to extend to industrial automation, yet it's caused already millions of dollars of damage. So it's a definite concern for the power industry as well. It was created likely to attack the grid, and we've seen it done, and we've seen it being done so in sponsorship of attacks in the Crimea region. But getting into the rest of the threats, top three overall, one that's been on the top of the list of everyone who was polled in the SANS survey was devices and things that cannot be protected. So we hear these concepts of Internet of Things, and certainly if you're involved in smart grid, you understand that there are a lot of intelligent nodes and end devices that are being added to the grid that make it more efficient, that make it smarter, that allow municipalities to meter more efficiently. However, this connectivity does come at a price, and that is the very benefit that it provides, and that is connectivity. It's just exposes new vulnerabilities and pathways for cyber threats to occur and to intrude into your network. So something we definitely need to be aware of. The next is internal threat or internal threats within the organization, whether they be accidental or intentional. This will definitely speak to operational intelligence, anomaly detection, and the ability for ICS cybersecurity solutions to integrate with a SIM or firewalls in existing infrastructure that can help stakeholders, whether they be operations managers or cybersecurity practitioners alike, to achieve a mode of operational intelligence and excellence as well, so that they can actually prevent accidental threats, failures, and manage their assets in the field. So, and then of course we return to external threats again as the third overall most identified threat. Interesting, honorable mention here is extortion, ransomware, and other financially motivated attacks reaches the number 4 spot. Just last year, this was something that was not on the top of the list. So it does show you that with combination of item 3 with externally state-funded attacks, that extortion or ransomware, whether that ransomware is the sole motivation behind the malware or not. So many people think that that's not the case. That has elevated quickly in 1 year as being a hugely relevant concern to ICS cyber practitioners in the field. So how do we manage that? So at this stage, I want to take a brief break from the numbers and give a little validity and history behind, not myself per se, but behind Nozomi Networks and our solution. So Nozomi Networks is a rather new ICS cybersecurity company. We have been around for a number of years. With our founder, Andrea Carcano, worked for E&I, which is one of the largest oil and gas companies based in Italy, but with global deployments, of course. So he was able to hone this technology that was a passive approach that recognized that was built on anomaly detection, not injecting packets into the network. In other words, and it was able to flourish and continuously be developed into Nozomi Networks and what it is today. So we've been around for since 2015. There are a few of us in the market that approach this solution or the ability to combat these ICS cyber threats in different ways. However, best practices have been identified, and we're going to cover them in this presentation today. Nozomi Networks, that's the brief top-level background of our company. Our flagship product or our solution is called SCADAguardian, and we're going to cover that briefly here. So SCADAguardian implements an innovative, we like to call it innovative, but it certainly is, it speaks for itself, passive technology approach that is all built around monitoring and assessing industrial control systems. This appliance can be deployed physically or virtually, and as I mentioned earlier, it's passive. It's non-intrusive to the network, so it doesn't add anything that can be recognized in terms of packets or information, which is critically important for ICS security practitioners defending against any malware attack or recognizing any anomaly before it becomes a threat. It listens to that traffic within the control and process networks. If you think of ISA 99 or the Purdue model, that could put the perspective of layer 1 to layer 7. So the visibility of this solution is quite vast, from end nodes all the way up to an enterprise integration within a corporate network. And it uses artificial intelligence and machine learning techniques to get smarter with the information it gathers. So the great benefit of SCADAguardian and the solution is that it advances with the malware, with the threat itself. It learns its host network, the nodes, the connections, and it can reset itself and continuously advance and grow more intelligent. It offers a lot of visualization tools. So this really speaks to number 2 on the most identified threats of accidental internal threats. Of course, it's relevant across the board, but we really see ICS cybersecurity software solutions as being operational tools as well that really give the virtualization and the visualization tools for SOCs or operations managers to see problems quickly and to execute remediation and preventative techniques. So, getting into the one comprehensive solution for ICS security and visibility, this is Nozomi Network solution architecture. Honestly enough, if you are not, of course, looking to see the world or the ability to address cyber threats through the lenses of Nozomi Networks, you definitely would want a solution in some way, whether it be an aggregation of many solutions providers or your existing providers, to cover these topics in the solution diagram. You want to have an aspect of central management. Up top, we have the CMC, which stands for the Central Management Console. that aggregates devices or units in the field. Say you have multiple networks. If you're the smart grid, you have multiple substations and control rooms controlling each of those substation units or sectors, if you will. At each module, at each control room, you'll want to have some form of network virtualization, modeling of traffic going in and out of your network, protocol monitoring, things to this nature. You want to be able to keep an asset inventory. You want to track new devices or changed devices, changed connections, new nodes. Anything that's been historically logged or changed within the network that you're monitoring needs to be tracked and registered. So that will also have to have a historian with it and a server to store that data securely. You'll definitely need to have some advanced form of anomaly detection and intrusion detection, and some form, ideally, of risk analysis. And this is where a lot of solutions out there can claim, but not all are created equal, so definitely test this if you are looking to implement a passive cybersecurity solution in the field. What anomalies can be discovered? How is risk detected? How is risk rated, for example? What are the variables and metrics that the solution uses to do this? And that leads into vulnerability assessment. Ultimately, you want to be able to couple potential threats and identified cyber threats to an overall assessment of your vulnerabilities, and then, of course, dashboards and reporting. So compliance is important for many large-scale industries where ICS, critical infrastructure, is involved. Are you able to turn these assets, this data into compliance and reporting quickly? Those are the 5 core solution modules that we'll cover today. Excuse me, but we'll also cover briefly how well an ICS solution, since the space is relatively new, how well it integrates with existing cybersecurity solutions that exist today at the enterprise level, which I've touched on briefly. That's a SIM or a conventional firewall, whether it be a corporate firewall or an industrial firewall. These solutions are active, meaning that they do inject packets into the field. So we need to change the strategy, extend the strategy, if you will, especially for things like the grid, to a passive approach that really allows things like SIMs and firewalls to actually become all the more relevant and powerful. And we'll talk about how that works here with a sample architecture. So I do understand that the text here is small. On the left is just merely detected items that can be found using the SCADAguard appliance. For your own thinking, you probably just want to sub SCADAguardian with whatever solution you choose to use. But using the Purdue model, or in reference to the ISO 99 model here, from level 1 all the way to level 0, there's threats and anomalies that should be identified using your ICS solution or your cybersecurity strategy. But more importantly, let's just talk about the solution diagram here. So I mentioned that a robust and a complete ICS cybersecurity strategy, in order to address the top 3 threats, definitely wants to have an aggregation strategy. So Nozomi Networks has the CMC. It's not necessarily, it's a different technology from the SCADAguardian module that you'll see represented in the icons from level 3 to level 2 below. But it's a change of view, it's a change of operation model where you can turn the SCADAguardian into an aggregation, a summary management or visibility tool, to use a more appropriate term, that you can extract appropriate and most important assets of your entire fleet, of your entire network, or your networks, plural. The CMC manages over 1,000 devices or appliances, which gives huge potential for scalability without having any sacrifice to performance. So that's point number 1. You'll definitely want to be able to aggregate and scale, especially for the grid. It's also important to ask the solution provider will there be any sacrifice to performance? At what point will there be a sacrifice to performance? And do they own the full stack of technologies? Meaning, do they depend on Linux to run their software, for example, or do they own their own operating system? Solution providers that own their own operating system obviously are able to scale better. They are more control of the technology, and they run into latency at a higher level. So they're able to, of course, as I mentioned earlier, scale with no performance implications. At level 3 and level 2, they'll definitely want to strategically place appliances to monitor the appropriate applications and subnets, if you will, or application networks where appropriate. It works, as you can see, they're all located conveniently by either a firewall and a switch, which would, up top you'd see in level 3, this would be like a control room with an industrial deep packet inspection firewall, and in the level 2 region along with a switch. So this is why a passive approach is very important, because we're not injecting any new information, any new packets into the network, which can cause issues either from a risk standpoint or even just a standard regulation standpoint for the grid. Furthermore, and what it's not talked about is if it does inject packets in the network, it's easily found, and it can have a profile which makes the writers of malware much more able to recognize its profile within the network, and therefore much more able to attack your network as well. So those are all things to keep in mind. So yeah, so we're about midway through here. I quickly want to go through our application modules, which you'll see we use standard terminology. Some might be new, but these are general best practices for ICS cybersecurity, and definitely what you should look for. I think I'll go through these quickly, but we already talked about this to a large degree. Just in summary, we need to have visualization and modeling capabilities of nodes in the field. We need to be able to attack and to intelligently and detect anomalous activity, intrusion, and rate that risk. We need to assess that risk, and we need to discover vulnerabilities, which obviously lend itself to the overall risk profile of your network. And it needs to have, at least it's recommended, of course, to have integratable and clear dashboards for reporting purposes, and an asset inventory so you can go back in time. You can look at new nodes and keep track of your network structure. So network visualization, and what does it mean, and modeling, what does it mean from an advanced context? So you basically want to visualize the entire ICS operation. You need to map nodes, devices, and networks, identify devices, connections, protocol information, and the location of those end nodes and devices. What we'll see a lot of times in deployments, and of course we won't mention any names, but we have been deployed in some of the largest municipalities and grids in the world. Sometimes devices go undiscovered until we're able to deploy a tool. So that speaks to not only our technology, but the overall space of advanced ICS cybersecurity solutions providers to be an operations tool as well, a visibility tool, not just a pure cybersecurity tool. We're able to, by advanced visualization and modeling, discover assets in the field that were not there, at least operations managers didn't know existed prior to our deployment. Very important. This highlights areas of interest using customizable alerts, colors, and icons. So it definitely gives the user, the customer, the power to really align the solution's capabilities with their operational needs. They might have special reports, standards, internal operation practices that they want to customize and therefore duplicate across their entire fleet or their entire network. You'll want to find that with network visualization and modeling capabilities. Now, anomaly, intrusion, and risk detection. You definitely want to be able to test this component. So this is, as what I said, this is the top-level statement that many solutions providers out there can claim they do, but they're certainly not all created equal. and this is why a demo is important. You need to be able to detect process anomalies, intrusions throughout your ICS network, meaning that if we have 100% visibility to 30% of your network, it really doesn't really mean anything significant. So this is why passive solution is important, and this is why demoing the product to see how much of the network you can actually visualize and discover anomalies in is very important. You also want to look for some AI components. Now, not all solutions providers in this field have this capability, but one thing that we do at Nozomi Networks is SCADAguardian comes with an artificial intelligence, an AI capability that has dynamic learning. And what dynamic learning means is that once we deploy SCADAguardian into its host network, it learns all the assets, the nodes, the connections automatically. And once it reaches an appropriate mode of understanding, it automatically switches from what we call learning mode into protection mode. That requires no human involvement. And we actually think that that's a big component to achieving more operational excellence and a higher mode of security as well to address the top 3 ICS cyber concerns and cyber threats. And of course, last but not least, you want to be able to integrate this with the use of an aggregation tool like RCMC and whatever SIM you have in place at your corporate level. So now that you have an ability to deploy and discover anomalies, you want to be able to assess what you've discovered in an amicable and detailed way. This is relevant for malware intrusion, accidental errors, even potential failures of capital equipment, sensors, et cetera, et cetera. So this you want to have a vulnerability assessment that's foundationally based on some analytics engine that's powerful. And you definitely want to be able to understand what this ICS cybersecurity solution uses to rate the vulnerability assessment. So we think it's best practice to use the NVD, which stands for the National Vulnerability Database. It's built according to NIST. According to the SANS survey, I think it's 47 or 48% of global practitioners, adhere to this model to guide their cybersecurity strategy. So while it's foundationally based or built off an organization within the USA, its implications and its relevance in Europe, Asia Pac, even India is certainly quite relevant and a great best practice. It's the largest organization of its kind, and that's what we use to update our vulnerability rating and assessment against. Yeah. And then last, certainly not last but least, but we want to be able to communicate this information clearly in dashboards and reporting. This is the UI or the UX component. I won't spend too much time on this, but people on this webinar certainly understand the importance of a product's usability and the clarity in which it is able to present that information, and how flexible it is to extract, to download that data, to share it within stakeholders within your company, whether it be your supervisors or other heads at managing different portions of your operation. So, we definitely think it's important to quickly meet monitoring reporting requirements wherever you are on the globe. SCADAguardian has an agile product platform. It's as part of the benefits of owning your whole stack, where we're able to not only give a lot of out-of-box functionality in terms of dashboard and reporting flexibility, but we're able to actually work with our customers in their industries and in their geographical regulatory bodies that might be affecting their requests to customize templated approaches to what they need as well. So that's something that's important. Asset inventory speaks to the history and capabilities of your product. Now, this is relevant in so many ways. This functionality of an ICS cybersecurity solution affects your ability to not only recognize threats or malware intrusions from internal or external players, but it helps you report and keep a log of them, and to reach a level of rapid remediation and correction Why? How does this work? Well, having an asset inventory definitely allows you to go back in time and see what's changed in your network with clear indicators using great dashboards and display methods. So if you've identified a point of risk of a certain firmware deployment, or a new node is being flagged for alert in one portion of your network, you can quickly find where that alert exists. The information of that alert associated with the new switch, the new firmware deployment, the make and model number of that device in the network, and quickly go back in time and see when that change happened and compare and contrast. So it's great for what we call forensics analysis, but it's also great simply for reporting metrics and ability to show how things have changed. So it's something that you'll definitely want to look for in mitigating the threats identified by ICS practitioners. And last but not least, I won't spend much time on this, but you want an aggregation tool, as I mentioned earlier, that's able to allow your system to scale. Okay, you'll be able to extract the very critical viewpoints of dashboards that you might have seen at the layer 3 level up to the layer 4 or even enterprise level using some form of remote access. So with that, we're making quite a bit of progress here. I want to talk about deployment model. So we've talked about the threats, the numbers from the SANS survey, and the 5 key solution variables that you definitely want to have some component of in the ICS cybersecurity deployment or strategy. Now let's talk how we actually deploy a passive solution in the field. So a standard deployment model scenario for a ruggedized industrial cybersecurity solution will definitely at least be implemented in some form similar to this, where we're going to be able to connect via span near ports of network devices to guarantee the isolation of the appliance. So we definitely know what's going in and out of this appliance, so we can easily not only deploy what we call hot deploy with no interface on active communications, but we're also sure that we're capturing all network traffic within our host network. So that's critically important. As I mentioned earlier, we work in coordination with the process network, the control network, to ultimately capture information all the way down to the field network, which is the sensor level, the node level, if you will. You want to have flexible deployment models. I don't want this to be a commercial for Nozomi, but I'm certainly speaking about what I know and what I'm actually able to share because it's our products. But you want to have a flexible form factor, and of course, if everyone on this call is related to the smart grid, you certainly know that meeting certain standards are incredibly important in the power industry, and form factor, performance, throughput. It's not a one-size-all approach. Not all solution providers, even leading ones, have this ability to own their full stack, meaning that they own their hardware as well. But definitely, it is a plus, and I don't think that I need to really validate that for all those on the call if you're experienced within the industry. Meeting form factors and being ruggedized to meet the requirements for the substation is something that you definitely want to be able to provide. However, if you have your own solution modules out there, if you have your own hardware, you also want a solution that can deploy virtually. And as I mentioned earlier, owning the full stack that also includes operating systems. So this is still relevant for virtual deployments. If an ICS cybersecurity vendor does not own their operating system, they still can deploy virtually, but are they really deploying something that's scalable, dependable, and that can perform in a large deployment? That's why we offer varying, if you will, virtual models as well to meet those requirements, but also meet the flexible needs of our customer. I touched on this earlier on the solution diagram. You want to make sure that you can integrate with your corporate, or I should say enterprise network, or whatever you have existing within your network to meet security needs. This is probably going to be some form of firewall at the enterprise level and even the industrial level. Within your switches, you could have an embedded router with firewall capabilities. We seek to extend and add to that. I don't think anybody would dispute that that has not been enough. The conventional approach to cybersecurity hasn't even kept enterprises safe. And when we talk about things like critical infrastructure, when we talk about things like the grid, we definitely need to achieve a higher level of security, and that comes with not only the core capabilities that we've discussed at length in this presentation, but how seamlessly we integrate with what has already been deployed and it exists in the infrastructure already. So already in our short history, SCADAguardian supports HP, ArcSight, Splunk, IBM Radar, more to come. These are just our official and certified partners that we integrate with SIMs, but also same with firewall integration, where we're part of the Fortinet security fabric, which is something I also encourage you to check out to learn more about platform approaches to security. SCADAguardian is an integrated and critical part of their fabric.
Thomas,
Hi everyone. Looks like we lost connection. Can everyone hear me again? Hello, testing.
We can hear you, Thomas.
Excellent. I hope that we are nearing the end of the webinar, and we will be open for questions. I hope that did not last too long, that delay. So let's get back to the remaining portions of the webinar here. Sorry for that. So we talked about the threats, the solution aspects, and how we deploy that solution. Now, standard deployment scenarios, to learn more about them and to learn more about the SANS survey, I could have included a hyperlink, but for everyone with this simply, virtually monitoring this webinar, I wanted to give you the full URL. You can download the SANS survey, which has the top 3 threat vectors. It speaks to them in detail, but it also covers a great deal more of information, including spending, investment areas, general practices, things of this nature. It's a very detailed report. You can download it at the top link. There is a blog on this exact topic that goes into each cyber threat in greater detail at nozomi.com, nozominetworks.com. You just simply go to the blogs page. Or you can just learn more about our ICS cybersecurity technology online as well. So with that, I'll wrap it up for questions. Once again, I have no idea how quickly you guys lost the connection to my webinar, so I hope it wasn't too long. And with that, I will hand it back to the Smart Grid team to facilitate questions.
Thomas?
Yes.
Yeah, so now we have not received any questions yet. So I think we'll be receiving questions through email from the attendees later, and that will be sharing you.
Great.
Yeah, so I guess now we can end this session.
Okay, sounds good to me. Yeah, so for any questions, feel free to reach out to the email sent out to you for registration. And in later webinars, we can cover threats in greater detail and basically crawl into these topics with features, technologies, and programming language that are really changing the way that the grid is secured. So with that, thanks everyone, and yeah, I'll look for your questions.
Okay, thank you, Thomas, for your presentation. Thank you very much. Okay.